Welcome to Energy Week, episode 20. Ryan Ray alongside Ellen Wald. Ellen, how's it going today?
Everything is fantastic except for the weather, which is gloomy and cold.
Well, it's perfect here in the great state of Texas, so I'm not going to complain.
Why didn't I move to Texas when I had the chance?
You should have. You should have. You should have. Of course, you got the beach close by, and so the beaches are better there.
That's true. That's true. We have a really nice beach.
Yeah, the beaches in Texas, at least the ones I've been to, they're nothing like they are in Florida. So anyways, before we kind of get into the sponsor and what's going on this week, I saw you were doing some traveling this weekend, kind of had part of a roundtable discussion, I think. What was that about, and what can you tell us about it?
Yeah, it was a really neat experience. It was kind of a last minute thing that had to do with the visit by Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the United States. And there were some members of the Saudi Shura Council, which is this kind of consultative body, I guess you'd call it. It's not exactly a legislative body because they're a monarchy, but it's this kind of consultative body that looks at, they explain it to us, but they look at either laws that are in existence or they look at reports by the different ministries in the government, and they can make recommendations and even change some of the laws on the books there. And so I and a few other people had the opportunity to talk to two of the women who are on the Shura Council about some of the things that are going on in Saudi Arabia, particularly the perception of women, of Saudi women in the United States and also vice versa, and hear about some of the things that they are working on in Saudi Arabia to really kind of make some strides in the treatment of women. And they, the two women that we spoke to, felt very strongly that yes, it's very true that Saudi women do not have all their rights, but they felt that Mohammed bin Salman recently made a statement where he basically admitted this and said that they don't have all their rights and we need to work to correct this. And they felt very enthusiastic about that and about the changes. I asked them, they're very excited about women being able to drive. And I did ask what they thought about whether the male guardianship laws and whether they might be removed at some point, because this is really one of those sticking points. Basically, there are certain things that Saudi women cannot do without the permission of a male guardian who is either their husband, their father, their brother, or if there's no one else, it could be their uncle or someone else, or even their son. And a lot of the restrictions have been eased, like Saudi women can start businesses without a male relatives' permission, but still to, say, apply for a passport or travel outside the country, they would need that permission. And they felt very confident that those restrictions would be removed at some point in the future, maybe not tomorrow or the next day, but in the relatively near future, which is definitely a good move in the right direction, I think, for Saudi Arabia.
No, it sounds like it is. And, it kind of goes back to what we talked about before. When you start dealing globally, you're going to be impacted, good or bad. You're going to be impacted by other nations, other cultures, other things. And so this sounds like a move in the right direction, though. And I think it's one of those things you kind of have to be patient and be appreciative of what's happening, understanding that, everything's not going to change overnight, but it is kind of trending in the right direction, which is a good thing. And I think maybe 2-3 years from now, it sounds like we'll be further down the road. And my question would be is 3 to 4 years ago, would you think we'd be here today, or is this kind of an accelerated growth from what you would have thought maybe, this 3 to 4 years back?
I definitely have not thought about this 3 or 4 years ago. I would never have thought of these changes. And there are a lot of things that are different. The women that we spoke to, they were very frank about the fact that there have been a lot of changes, but also that a lot of people don't understand how things have changed. And one of the things we brought up was that there's really a lack of contact between Saudi Arabia. It's very hard to go there. I mean, I went there in this past November, and I had a very hard time getting there, just getting a visa to go there. But apparently they're going to be introducing tourist visas in the next couple weeks, in fact. And I think that even though Americans often don't really want to get a visa to go places, but because we feel like we should just be able to get on the plane and hand someone our passport and get into the country. But if it will be a lot easier to travel there if you can get a tourist visa instead of having to get some sort of a work visa. Basically, I mean, I wasn't working there, but I had to get I had to be sponsored by a company, basically, in order to go, and that would relieve. I think that you're definitely going to get people who are kind of interested to go and see what's in Saudi Arabia. There was a woman there who's a photographer who has photographed a lot of the ancient and interesting archaeological and geological sites in Saudi Arabia. And I think that there are a lot of people who will be interested to go there and will learn more about what is and is not kind of true about Saudi Arabia. Like, people think, oh, Saudi women need a man's, permission to just leave the house. And that's not true at all. There are tons of Saudi women who go out alone all the time. So I think it'll be really interesting.
Speaking of Saudi Arabia, if they want to have us with these new visas, come do a show from Aramco.
Yeah.
Or one of the palaces. We'd be there for, go be happy to go do a show, fly Emirates in first class, and
definitely
we could do a lot of shows on a lot of topics there, I'm sure. So for all our Aramco listeners, feel free to contact us, Ryan at globalenginemedia.com, or if you can't get a travel visa, where else might someone learn about Saudi Aramco, Ellen?
Well, they could pick up Saudi Inc. coming to bookstores near you on April 3rd, which is 9 days away. Count them down, 9 days. And they can learn all the interesting things that you want to know about Aramco, about Saudi Arabia. Here's some amazing pictures from the fantastic photo insert from my book.
Wow.
This is just a tease.
Wow. Well, I'm going to pull it up on the screen here, and I'm looking at it, and you can see I have purchased my copy, as I promised, March 23rd. I ordered mine, and it will be here. I think it actually will be here on the day it's released. I think that's how Amazon works.
I know.
So
it was really exciting. All of a sudden, all of my, I've ordered a lot from them as well. And all of a sudden, the date was updated. It says now you will receive it on the day it is released.
Right. So I won't have it before next week's show, but the next week's I will have it, and we'll have a chance at least to look through it. But here it is. And so, as we mentioned, this is important. This is really important. They have a Kindle, they have a hardcover, and they have an audiobook. And you really need to get what you need to get. I think all three. That only makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about worst case scenarios last week, and if you're on the beach and your Kindle dies, you got to have the hardcover, right? If you're on a plane and you're getting a little, some people get motion sickness by looking down at books on planes or cars, you could have the Audible right there plugged in. So, yeah, you need to get all three. That's just kind of a no-brainer in my opinion. And so go ahead and get that picked up. And before we move any further, though, speaking of pick up stuff, go pick up your free trial over at the folks with Drilling Info. Had a conference call with them this morning, actually, and they are going to be adding a new trial to the ones that are there. Not sure when that's going to go up, but you can see on the screen here we have one for oilfield service companies and one for land professionals. They're going to be adding at least one, maybe two more. And let me just kind of tell you some of the feedback they gave me. So if you're looking for the oilfield service company free trial, a couple of things, because we've had some kind of feedback from listeners on this. You have to go through a kind of a quick pre-screening process. And this basically is from Drilling Info's standpoint saying, hey, we got to make sure that you are an oilfield service company, you're not an existing client, you're not a past client, things like that. People who actually are going to use the trial. If you're wanting just to kind of get in and just kind of check it out, what they have and what their platform can do, the Landman trial might be the better option for you. It's kind of a quick in, quick out entry deal. I think you get, I think it's $100 of free credit to start downloading courthouse documents. Or you can wait until we get the other two trials or one trial, whatever it's going to be, in the next week or two. So that's kind of what's going on there. GlobalEnergyMedia.com/DI. GlobalEnergyMedia.com/DI is where you can find all of that out. And so, Ellen, let's kind of get into the show today. A lot to cover. Let's start off with, let's start here. From the Los Angeles Times, here's why New Mexico's oil boom is raising a lot of questions about water. And we're talking offline here. This is something we've talked about on the other show, the Texas Oil and Gas Podcast, some of these water issues that the Permian is facing. So I'm just curious. I know you cover the oil and gas industry, but reading this piece, was this kind of an eye-opener for you? Or is this something that you're like, oh, yeah, obviously? Or what was kind of your takeaway from this?
So I've always known that there are a lot of water issues. And it's not just with fracking, there are a lot of water issues with all sorts of oil development. I've read a lot about some of the water issues when I was researching my book about Saudi Aramco, and they don't have a lot of groundwater at all there, and so they've had to build huge desalination plants just to have fresh water to use in their processes. But one of the things I thought was really interesting was the way that they discussed, and if you'll excuse me, I'm looking down at my hard copy of this, was that because of this distinctive geology, I've always kind of been interested in the terrain of the area of New Mexico and Arizona, and how uncommon that particular terrain is, and how that relates to the fracking process and the new, and these water requirements. Particularly, it seems like New Mexico as an area for fracking is really heating up now. I know everyone's still Permian, but if you look at some of the rig counts and things like that, you'll see that New Mexico is definitely up there. And so I thought that this was a really interesting look at some of the specialized practices and how companies are dealing with, the geology that's there, and also making sure that, it's not harmed.
Right. And, one thing gets lost, I think is an important point, is that the Permian extends into New Mexico. And so when you're talking Permian, it goes, right in there to the southeast corner of New Mexico. And a lot of people,
Texas.
Uh-huh.
We love you, Texas, but it's not just Texas.
It's not just Texas. And so, we usually think Texas, and for good reasons. I think it's like half of all the rigs, or 500 of the rigs, are in Texas right now currently. So there's a lot of rigs and a lot of activity here in Texas. The issue that I was asked on my show the other day was, what do we do about this water? That we had a landowner out in West Texas, and he's talking about, transitioning from, drilling wells to bringing maybe brackish water or non-potable water. And, I told him that essentially, in my standpoint, my viewpoint, there's kind of three things that kind of leads this discussion when you think about water issues, especially in the States. The first off is the price. And so if the water's if the price is like $100 a barrel, everybody's making a ton of money, then importing water or bringing in water from somewhere else, that's not really that big of an issue because you're making a bunch of money. As the price goes down, well, you're going to be more cost aware of what's going on. The other thing is going to be the environmental agencies. Where do they come in and step up? And then the third thing that's going to drive this discussion is the locals. The problem with the locals is you've got mixed interests. So Ellen might have a 5,000-acre ranch out in West Texas, and she wants the drilling company to drill wells because that gives her access to water when they're gone. Whereas me in my little one-bedroom studio apartment in Midland, I might not like that because I'm going, oh my gosh, my water bill's going up. They're draining our aquifers, and so you can see this problem. But those are kind of the three ways I've kind of looked at this issue. But the good thing is there is discussions going on in the Permian about how to handle these water issues, and so it feels like at least the producers are being a little bit more proactive than they may have been historically on looking at how to tackle this type of issue. And that's kind of, I don't say it's all you can ask for, but that's at least the bare minimum I think you could ask for. And that's what they're doing.
And I think that there's definitely a sense of that producers want to have good relationships with the locals or the people who live in the areas that they're drilling. But because this is not just one and done thing, this is clearly they see a long-term relationship there. And so, being proactive in dealing with issues of water is definitely a huge step towards establishing good relationships with the people who live in the area that you're going to be working in, and potentially even employing people in.
Yeah, you've got that, and also we talked about on Friday's show. This idea, there's sinkholes out in West Texas, and they're talking about, the drilling might be the reason or the cause or making them sink faster. And one of the things I said on that show was, let's just say that the worst case scenario is that it's causing these sinkholes. Well, we can't stop drilling. Stop drilling as a country. The United States cannot say, hey, drilling caused sinkholes, we got to stop drilling. That would be catastrophic for us. That'd put us in a really bad spot. And the same thing here with the water is that if the water is going to be an issue, it's not that we can say, hey, well, let's just stop drilling the Permian Basin. We got to figure out a different solution for that. And then we got to figure out if companies can work that way. So I don't know what that solution looks like, but sometimes it's like, hey, there's a problem. Let's just kind of slow down on the drilling. Well, that's not really a viable solution right now, especially for U.S. shale producers where they're at. If they were to stop drilling, most of them, if not all, would go out of business. So it's one of these things that you had to kind of tackle on the run.
Yeah, exactly. And, we have sinkholes in Florida too, not caused by fracking.
Well,
It's Florida.
Well, that's what we said. We said, so it's kind of like they're doing the Occam's razor thing. What's the most likely explanation? There's a lot of drilling. Okay, well, we're starting there. That's fine. But the thing I kind of pointed out was to actually do you're the doctor here, you can tell me, to do a scientific experiment, wouldn't you need like a control Permian Basin where it's not being drilled with the same amount of people basically to kind of see if they had sinkholes there, and you could kind of compare it to the one that was being drilled to really understand. I mean, right? Isn't that how that works?
Yeah, it would be very difficult. It's like those earthquakes in Oklahoma. They think they're caused by the disposal of wastewater, but like, can you really know for sure?
Right. And so I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it isn't. It's just that, if your normal scientific method, you'd have to have some kind of, control that's not being tested. And we don't have that. So you kind of have to work while you're on the fly. So, but let's go to our next story, which is here in Texas. And this is, I think, an interesting piece here from the EIA. It's on their, I think it's their daily update piece they sent out for today, maybe, or from today. EIA estimates for Texas crude oil production account for incomplete state data, and they've got a lot of charts here, a lot of graphs here, and one of the things that not everyone realizes is that the Texas Railroad Commission doesn't release their data at the same time the EIA does, and so you kind of have this lag. And as we talked about a month ago, the EIA data comes from modeling and predictions and things like that. Reading this piece, was it helpful to better understand that, or would it change your opinion of maybe what you'd heard before?
I think it's always important to kind of be reminded of this, because the EIA puts out their, weekly things, and you think every time they do, you're like, oh, you think that's the be all and end all. So I think it's always important to remind people what's going on here. And, I think it's good that the EIA is explaining these things and explaining what the differences are. And they love their graphs and charts. And, it's nice to be able to kind of see what is. And we'll put a link to the article in the show notes so you can all see what we're talking about as well. But it's just interesting because and they explain what the methodology is. And I do think that if you're going to look at EIA and TRC statistics, that it's important to understand the methodology. And the EIA has a survey. It's called the 914 survey. And that's a survey that they give out to all these oil companies and ask them to basically report what's going on there, how much they've produced, and things like that. And so they develop their production estimates for Texas based on that survey. And that was established in 2015. So it's a fairly recent survey. But then, and so that's why the TRC has a different methodology or a different way of doing that than the EIA does. So the EIA has that survey, but the TRC data often takes longer. And apparently what the TRC does is that if they have certain things on reports that are incomplete, then they will kind of put them on hold and not include them with that, with that, data until it is complete, and then they'll update it. So the TRC data is constantly being revised, maybe even more than the EIA data. And so I think that just goes to show, like, it's really important to look at data from a whole bunch of sources. Look at the TRC, look at the EIA, look at drilling info, look at all of these different sources when you're looking to see what production is or where you think it's going.
Yeah, you mentioned that resolving the data, and there's a sentence in here. It says, once resolved, generally these resolutions take up to 2 years. And I was like, well, hold on. Wait, this started in 2015. We're in 2018.
Yeah.
Like, are you saying that last year we were still resolving stuff from 2015?
Yeah.
And I think, go ahead.
But it says the TRC's published reports are within 95% of their ultimate value after 7 months. So they're saying it can take 2 years, but it's pretty much 95% accurate after 7 months. Well, which is almost a year.
Yeah, right. But the 5% could still be a decent amount of what's going on in the marketplace. But I hear you. It's for me. It's one of these things we talk about, kind of beat the dead horse, if you will, but it's like, hey, everyone's reacting to this information, overreacting to information, and here the EIA, for like them, love them, whatever you hate them, whatever. I do agree they're trying to be transparent, and on some level, I think we have to kind of sit back with some of these metrics and realizing, first off, right now, I think it's half the rigs in the nation are in Texas. So half the nation's in the rig. It's like 500 rigs are here in Texas alone. And then you talk about New Mexico. Then you go to New Mexico. I don't know how their agency works like Texas does, but 500 rigs. Well, whatever discrepancies that causes, that's going to be a huge number compared to what the Balkan puts out, or what the the New Mexico puts out, or the Marcellus, or the Utica, or any of that stuff. So it's one of these things. It's like, I don't know. I think when we first talked about the subject was, companies aren't exactly probably wanting this information at real time because of the trading and stuff like that. But I'm just curious to see, as we kind of go down this path, if you look at it now, you say, okay, well, this survey started in 2015. What did they do before that? And then how did the markets react before that? Now we're starting to understand better that this survey is only 2 years old. They're updating it. We understand that there's so much information that's not being collected. I think Texas puts it out 60 days after the well's completed, if I remember. So that's a pretty long lag between the time the EIA releases it and then when Texas Railroad Commission actually releases that data. Will the oil and gas industry become something that's actually, I don't want to say retroactive, but they start looking back to, they start reacting to the news a little bit later, or is it just we're too far gone and we had to, the day traders have consumed the industry and we're going to be trading every day?
I think it's both. I think it's mostly the second, but I do think that if there's a big revision, people do take note. And you can see that reflected in the market sometimes. One interesting fact, which I think it's interesting, and for our international listeners out there who may not really be familiar with why there's so much discrepancy between reporting and this stuff, it really has to do with the United States being a federal system, and that these things are really very based statewide. So that, and a lot of states developed these, agencies to kind of deal with oil and gas production before we ever had a federal or national level energy, even Department of Energy. The Department of Energy was like not, I think it was formed under Jimmy Carter. So we're talking like very late, and the Texas Railroad Commission is much, much older. So a lot of these state reporting agencies came out before there was anything going on nationally. And so they all have their own methodology that they use. The one in Oklahoma is different from Texas, and like you said, different from North Dakota. One of the interesting things is that Alaska is very, very on the mark with its reporting, mostly because just about all of the crude oil produced in Alaska has to go through the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. So they know exactly how much crude oil is coming through that pipeline, and they have it all set up. It's all state run, and they report everything exactly to the EIA. So they're one of the very very accurate reporting like state reporting agencies. And I've heard people who international people who live in other places be very upset. Why can't every state be like Alaska is? And that's probably the first time a lot of people have been like, why can't every other state be like Alaska?
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting. And this is just a factor of the way that America is. And yeah, maybe it's a little less accurate than we'd wish, but that's the way we are.
Well, yeah, okay, but I think, it's a little less accurate on real time. But if we're being fair, we can criticize OPEC for being wrong.
Real-time data?
Yeah.
Ha 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 ha.
So if we're being fair,
real and data should be in the same sentence there.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting to. So for our international listeners, if you want to be critical of America, that's fine. But there is plenty of blame to go around when you look at production and oil levels from around the world, not just the U.S. And so, it's interesting. I'm curious, just your take on this. Kind of, you mentioned it. Do you think today, if President Trump executive order got rid of the EIA, he just boop, it's gone? What do you think? The oil, actually, so first off, the oil and gas industry in the U.S. would go crazy because they go crazy over everything. But do you think they would actually be excited about that, or do you think they would be disappointed about that? So do you think they actually like having this data to play with, or do you think that they they kind of, so you have like Harold Hamm, who's always out there, kind of against what they're doing, and you can say if you give him the best intention, he's trying to correct it. That's fine. But do you think someone like Harold Hamm would go, you know what, this is better. Now I can actually run the math, and other people can't. It kind of gives me a competitive advantage.
I think that for companies, the reporting standards are they probably feel their owners. They probably don't like having to fill out these EIA forms every month, and they don't actually have to. It's all voluntary. From what I know, it's all voluntary. I think that they then still have to report to the state, and that the state's stuff is not necessarily optional. I think there are definitely a lot of people who would love to see the EIA be dissolved. I'm generally of the opinion that the government wastes way too much money on agencies. I happen to think that the EIA actually does provide a valuable service. Although I've heard people say that really we shouldn't have a Department of Energy because most of the Department of Energy is just about like securing nuclear waste and nuclear energy and things like that. And that can be handled by the Defense Department. But the EIA is a really, I think, interesting component. I don't think it's a very expensive part, but for those of us who want to at least look at what's happening or get a sense of it, even if we know it's not that accurate, it does provide a lot of relevant information or interesting information. Now, Harold Hamm would probably love to, to get rid of the EIA, and I definitely think you'd see a lot of private sector businesses, trying to kind of emulate that. So it would definitely be. It would be interesting. I don't want to say it would be all bad because sometimes private sector does do things better than government. Wow.
I would say,
shocker.
I would say most of the time. I would say most of the time, or all the time. But I'll meet you in the middle on most of the time on that one, that they do stuff better. And you already see that right now. There is companies who sell data, right now. So the EIA, whatever you think about, there is companies, there's competition for that space. Regardless. Okay, let's turn to our next piece. And it seems like Total is going to be the next sponsor of this show because they're on here every week, at least something about Total.
If we could get the CEO of Total on, so he's hilarious. He, by the way, for listeners who are into Twitter, he has recently joined Twitter, the CEO of Total, and he loves emojis. So his tweets are like all about the emojis, and he often makes these like really funny puns. So maybe we could get him on the show to talk about how oil CEOs use Twitter.
Yeah, the proper way to use emojis, because I watched a video one time on like the right emoji for the right emotion, and I realized I never got the right one right. Like even the smiley face, there's different smiley faces, and then I was like, I didn't know. I just thought this was funny, and here we go. But anyways, yeah, maybe you can come help break that down. Okay, so let's talk about this. I think we talked about it on this show, the Mexican off-water block, the auction that happened a few months back. But here's kind of a follow-up on that from Platts.
Yeah, I just thought this was a really interesting article on what's an ultra deep well.
Yeah. I mean, well, so let's kind of get the headline here. Total, ExxonMobil to drill ultra deep well in Mexico in October. The first line reads: Total and ExxonMobil will drill the first deep water well in a block awarded at Mexican hydrocarbon auction in October. And real quick, okay, I didn't tell you about this. So I talked to someone the other day working in Mexico. And I asked about, it's a U.S. company working in Mexico, and I asked about the presidential candidate running. We talked about that, about, I can't remember his name now, Obrador or whatever it was.
Yeah.
He's talking about rolling back the reforms. And so this is a company who's investing dollars in Mexico. And I said, hey, what are you guys doing about this? And he said, the feeling on the ground in Mexico right now is no one really is convinced that he's going to win. Not in the sense that he's going to lose, but it's not, the feeling in Mexico is that it's not a sure thing. So he could still lose. And so there is, and then I said, well, what if he does win? And he said, well, we're not actually sure that he's going to follow through with all the stuff he's saying. So the feeling, at least from someone I was talking to, is that maybe he's not as strong of a candidate as we're being led to believe. And so, we'll see about that. But then B, that maybe, just maybe, he's kind of bluffing on some of these policies, which I think is obviously a good thing we talked about.
Yeah, I think that's completely right. And he was definitely, you also have to remember, and I find myself reminding people of this all the time. Like when you see, say, like someone in Iran making a statement about something that seems like really off the rails. And yeah, they make a lot of off the rails statements. We have to remember these are politicians who are saying things for the benefit of their constituents. So we hear it from the outside and maybe start freaking out. We have to remember they have to, even if they're unelected people, they've got to be popular. And so they're going to say things to get that popularity. And whether or not they actually follow through with it is a totally different story. And, we should be used to that in the United States because that happens all the time.
It's a really in the US it happens?
Yeah, believe it or not. I know.
I've never noticed it. I thought the politicians did. They always followed through with all their campaign promises. They never lied or used hyperbole.
Of course not. But so that's a really interesting statement because what you say, because it also shows that, the media is going to tell us, we're going to get information about the Mexican election from the media. And it's going to heat up because, it's going to heat up in the next couple months. We're probably going to hear a lot more about it. But we got to remember that that's not necessarily based on really detailed, I guess I would say, experiences, like your guy who's on the ground in Mexico. Yeah. I mean, there's a difference between a reporter who goes for a couple weeks to cover an election and someone who's there.
Right. And my guy could be wrong too. So he's not. I'm not saying he's right. I was just surprised because they're pouring in a lot of money down there. And I said, hey, this is a big deal. And he's like, oh no, I talk to people every day in our office down there. They're not worried about it. They're not even sure he's going to win. And I said, man, I made the point, he's the leading candidate. I said, no, not that they just don't feel that he's that strong right now. Like it's a locked up deal. And that's kind of how that article and some of the other stuff I was kind of led to believe is, hey, he's kind of got it sewn up and it's over and what's going to happen. But he didn't feel that. He felt that didn't feel that strong about the candidate. So we'll see. But this article right here is kind of a representation of the kind of articles we won't see anymore if he wins and he does his thing. But you mentioned it's an ultra deep well. That caught your attention. I'm just curious, do you like the ultra deep wells a particular interest of you for some reason?
Sounds really I don't know, just sounds kind of interesting. Like everyone's like, oh, deep water, this, like ultra deep. I mean, how deep is it? But going back to the point that you were making before, it does say in this article, it says, so S&P Global Platts asked an Exxon executive what they thought about the situation in Mexico, and he said, he's an executive who's actually in Mexico, he said that they're going to go through with this regardless of who wins the presidential election and regardless of what happens to NAFTA. So, it does seem like the Mexican oil situation is less dependent on politics than we thought.
Well, only pushback I would say is that ExxonMobil is probably used to stuff like this switching around, and so they're one of those companies that they deal with this kind of stuff all the time. They're working in all parts of Africa. I would think that companies who aren't as internationally savvy as they are, who are looking to deal in Mexico, those are the ones that you'd have to watch out for because there's a lot of natural deals for Permian and Eagle for producers and pipeline companies that make right across the border, but they might not have this long-standing history, and those would be the ones that I would imagine that would be a little bit more skittish. And ExxonMobil, I could see them pulling out, but also I'm not surprised to hear that just because that they should be used to dealing with nefarious situations, to put it mildly.
That's a good point. It's a very good point.
Okay, let's turn to our next piece here. And we've kind of got a couple things around China here, all kind of around this idea of what's going on. So what is up with the price of tea in China, if you will?
Price of tea in China is more like the price of oil in China or the price of oil futures contracts in China.
Exactly.
I'm going to just say off the bat that this is not my specialty when it comes to understanding oil futures contracts. But I think that this is an important thing. It's an important subject to look at. So one of the articles refers to an article in the Wall Street Journal called China's Attempts to Supplant Dollar Face Historic Difficulties. Now, you might read that and think, what? They're trying to supplant the dollar? That's not going to happen. But then you have to realize that it really has to do with this new oil futures contract that's being offered in Chinese markets that is denominated in yuan or renminbi. I've never been quite clear on when to use which term, when to use the yuan, when to use renminbi. But so basically for, well, not forever. Here. Little history lesson. So, long time ago, oil used to be bought and sold entirely in the pound sterling. And then after World War I, during the 1920s, the dollar just started to kind of enter the market for being used to buy and sell oil. And over time, it gained a lot. And then after World War II, when England was having a lot of financial issues, the dollar really gained steam, and more trades were done in dollars. And then by the time we get to the 1970s, I think only 1/5 of the all oil trades were done in pound, and everything was done in dollars. And that's where you get this idea of the petrodollar and the petrostate and all of that, and why Saudi Arabia has its currency pegged to the dollar. So it's interesting that now China is they're saying basically like trying to supplant the dollar by offering oil contracts in their own currency. And they've been I think they've been sort of like sending out feelers for this for a while. There was a while ago, Russia agreed to accept payment for oil in yuan. But they were the only country, or the only big country, as far as I know, that would accept payment in the Chinese currency. And so everyone's kind of all abuzz because it's the first, offering of it on the, on an Asian exchange. It seems like it's not necessarily like taking over markets, but there are people who have responded to this and have done their first deal. One of the other articles I mentioned is just that one of Sinopec's trading arms had inked a deal to buy with a Western oil firm to buy Middle East crude priced in yuan. And it seems like they're mostly just offering, I think, Dubai and Oman benchmarks, but they're hoping to kind of create their own new benchmark.
A lot of benchmarking going on out there, it sounds like.
Yeah. So keep up with that. Could be interesting. See where it goes.
I'm curious your take on this, because if you go back, you talked about, the kind of the history of how we got to where we're at today with the trading. Do you think it's a good thing that we trade? I mean, okay, so if you're an American, you probably do, but just generally, do you think it's a good thing that the oil is traded on the dollar in general?
I think it is, mostly because it's good for the dollar as a currency, but it makes things cheaper, because like if you have to both change your currency to then buy oil, like you're losing money in those transactions because you have to pay to change your currency, and we don't have the gold standard anymore, so it's not like you can just do it in gold. And it also means what it also means is that countries will hold current reserves like in dollars. So like Saudi Arabia they hold their foreign reserves mostly in dollars because that's more useful for them. And it just means that our currency is stronger and more valuable, and more people will want it. I think sometimes we can feel like our currency is too strong, and that might be bad for some aspects of the market. But I do think that it is important that the dollar is the currency that is used in oil trading. But I do think it's interesting to see who wants to, take up these oil futures contracts in yuan and pay in renminbi, particularly because China is not exactly the most like open country, and it is known to manipulate its currency. So it'll be interesting to see whether these are all mostly just Chinese firms doing this, or whether you get other firms.
Yeah. The currency thing, as you mentioned, it's one of those things that's very interesting to me. I'm definitely not an expert on it. I have a lot of questions about it, because a lot of stuff that you kind of look at all these issues about the currency, a lot of them don't necessarily make sense on why we think about currency the way we do. I know I got some friends who are big on the gold standard, and I'm like, I understand the argument for the gold standard, but if no one takes gold, then the gold's not. And if no one takes dollars, then the currency only has value to the person you're trying to trade with, right? And so, if the person that you're trying to trade with doesn't take that currency, whether it's gold, silver, dollars, rand from South Africa, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And so, again, I'm not an economist. I don't fully understand all the arguments, but I am curious to see, the cryptocurrency, we talked about that before, how that will come in. I know there's been some attempts, and I think Venezuela had their own crypto dollar or something like that, petrodollar they're trying to do. Surprise, surprise, it didn't go. But I don't know. To me, it's one of these things where it's like, I'm not fully sure how currency happens 20, 30 years from now as we become more globally connected. I'm curious. Give your take on this. Is the way we currently do currency more of an old school type mentality before the world was kind of globally connected? We're now having all these currencies that you're trying to measure the difference between them, which is a moving target. Is that the best way to handle it?
I think definitely with the introduction of the euro, we've definitely moved to a new kind of era of currencies. But I think that there are so many people who make a lot of money off of currency changes that, there's no impetus to really move, out of this system. And I wanted to say one other thing about the gold standard. So little story, when I was in graduate school, one of the things that you have to do to kind of move on to the next stage where you're then going to do your own research and write your dissertation is you have to take a big exam in a bunch of different fields. And basically it's an exam about books that you've read. And so each category you have a different reading list. And so one of mine was I did like 20th century economic history. And I had a lot of free range to kind of read what I wanted. And I decided I was really interested in the gold standard. So I read books about the gold standard, particularly about the Great Depression. I read this book by Barry Eifengreen, who's a economist at University of California, Berkeley, called Golden Fetters, the Gold Standard and the Great Depression. And I don't think I was ever so interested in a book. And then I got to talk about it with my advisor, and he's like, yeah, I'm really not interested in that. And I was like, oh, shucks, I really wanted to learn more about the gold standard and this currency stuff. So I definitely recommend that book and his books if you want to learn more kind of about how we ended up off the gold standard and what it did to the economy. It could be interesting. So
yeah, I think Murray Rothbard has some stuff, and there's another another libertarian type guy who has something on it as well. I can't remember. I'm slipping me now, but yeah, I don't know. I've heard some really smart folks on the gold standard, and maybe I've just missed the argument because to me it's just I don't know. I'm not saying that I like our current currency situation as it is, because you just make more dollars, they're meaningless. But I'm not sure if you tie it to the actual metal, if the metal has to have value to someone. And to me, that's kind of always the thing is someone has to give this thing value. As we all know, that's how the market works. So anyway, I'm sure I'm missing something there. A listener will write in Ryan at globalengineering.com and explain it to me, and I will be happy to get it. I'll be happy to get it. I don't know. Maybe I missed it. Now, I'm looking through the links here you sent, Ellen, and maybe I missed this. I thought you sent. Did you not send the link about the Venezuela refineries closing? Did I see that somewhere else?
Maybe you saw it on Twitter. Yes, we should definitely talk about that though, because that was a big development. That there are, I think, 3 big refineries in Venezuela that are basically just shutting down, and that says a lot about this Venezuela's kind of slow decline into the end of its oil industry. Yeah.
Well, we talked about the one in, we had the story about the one a month ago. I'm trying to think where it was. I can't remember now. It wasn't in Venezuela. It was in, was it Curacao?
Yeah, so that's an oil refinery that PDVSA leases, right, I think.
Right.
These are all PDVSA owned refineries in Venezuela.
No. Yeah. So my point is that we talked a month ago about something outside of Venezuela being impacted, and now we're starting to see the core itself is crumbling, and I don't know how bad it's going to get there, but it's just getting worse and worse, and there's no hope. I say there's no hope. There's no end in sight, at least it doesn't seem.
No, and it just seems to be getting worse and worse. Someone also posted a really interesting video on Twitter over the weekend of this it wasn't quite a riot, but it was like PDVSA workers were really, really angry about something, and apparently this is an issue because in general they've kind of gone along with everything, and once it's going downhill so badly for them, and once they go on strike or whatever, I mean you could see a full stoppage of all their oil. I think they're producing now maybe just under 2 million barrels per day.
Right. Yeah.
I have to check the exact.
I do that little live stream on Instagram for Texas Oil and Gas Podcast, and every day. And the other day we had someone on from Venezuela. And and we were trying to get. The problem was, he said he couldn't speak good enough English because you can hop in. And so Instagram, if you're listening, if you will allow 3 people on a live stream, we had a translator on the stream who would have hopped in and translated because he was a oil field worker in Venezuela and wanted to talk about it. But he's like, my English isn't good enough. And I was just like, oh, man. And so I was really curious what he had to say because, same thing with the Mexico story. You hear these reports, but until you're there on the ground, it's even if me and you went to Venezuela tomorrow, we'd have a feel of what's going on there. But it wouldn't be the same as someone who's been there 30, 40, 50 years and has kind of seen the culture go and then government come and go and stuff like that. So, and then did you see the article about the Citgo guys down there?
No. What's going on with that?
Let me see here if I can pull it up real quick. I saw an article last week that said that the Citgo guys were being held as hostages.
Whoa! Oh, the ones that they are charging with something. They're charging them with something.
Yeah, here it is.
Yeah,
from the Examiner.
Yes.
Washington Examiner has it 7 days ago, it looks like. Let's see here. Headline, White House former Citgo executives are hostages in Venezuela. And then it said they're trying to be, they're being hostages, bargaining chips. And then the other thing I found interesting was the executives, Citgo's former CEO and 5 vice presidents, were arrested shortly before Thanksgiving and replaced by new executives led by CEO. I can't pronounce his first name, but his last name is Chavez. Yes.
What else?
A cousin of former Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez.
Of course.
And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So I don't know the full ins and outs of that story. I didn't know if you'd caught that headline and happened to dig into it any or not.
Not a whole lot, but I do remember when they were when they were taken, like when they were being held. I think, it was interesting because there was a lot in the news about potential sanctions for Venezuela, and then everything got subsumed by North Korea and Iran. But I think we will probably hear some more news about that soon, at least from the American administration.
Okay. All right. Final thing on Twitter, I did see right before we got on the show that you retweeted the missile. What was going on with that? I didn't.
Yeah.
I saw the headline, but I didn't really follow the story. Then I saw you tweeting about it, and so what did I miss?
Yeah, this was crazy. So it was like the mid-afternoon yesterday, and I got a text on WhatsApp from a friend in Saudi Arabia who said there were just missiles from Yemen went overhead and were intercepted.
Right.
And he was like, yeah, my wife said that there were these missiles. He's like, nah, I told her it was just like, the garbage or something. And he's like, no, they were missiles and Patriot missiles intercepting them. And there were a bunch that went to Riyadh, and then people were posting these incredible videos. You can't really tell, but what it looked like was missiles and then Patriot missiles intercepting them. There's definitely, people were saying debris, they were taking selfies next to like pieces of these things that landed.
Yeah.
And, but then I saw this morning that there was some guy who was saying it looks like they didn't really intercept the missiles. Like he was just looking at the videos. And I think we need some, I would not take what this person says at face value. I think we need a real missile expert to explain what, someone who's an expert in trajectory and ballistics to explain what was exactly going on, what they could even tell from these, videos. But it does appear like that one person died as a result of the debris coming down, and 2 people were injured in Riyadh.
Anybody from the Pentagon that works on the ballistic missile program, the Patriot missile program, you're welcome to come on. We'll be happy to talk about that. We'll make a slight detour. The thing that I saw when I watched this, I saw the headline, and I didn't really follow up with it. And then I saw the videos today, and man, that was scary. Obviously on a video, you don't have depth perception like you do if you're there. But there's a couple of videos you're like, oh my gosh, this is like the next street over. And then of course, once it hits, you realize it's a little further away. But it was just I couldn't imagine being there and just seeing those missiles, just flying around. So what's the deal? I mean, is this going to escalate, or is this kind of the end of it? Or
it could. I definitely don't think it's the end of it. I think so. This apparently was the most missiles that they've had sent, and they're definitely coming from Yemen. There's been a lot of evidence that these missiles have origins in Iran. I think we'll definitely hear about it in the UN. I don't know how much else it's funny because people are saying like that Saudi Arabia really needs to cut out whatever it's doing in Yemen, that this is an obstacle to everything else that they're trying to do. And then you see this and you kind of think like, well, what are they supposed to do? I mean, how would you feel if there were missiles being shot at a major city, where you lived? And I don't know what to say, honestly.
Okay, well, let's just recap it with this. Tell me if I get it wrong. Saudi Arabia and Iran hate each other, except for when it comes to oil. And then, however, Iran is selling missiles to Yemen, who is then shooting them at Saudi Arabia. Did I miss anything there?
You missed like this whole interlude with this rebel group called the Houthis that are, yeah.
Well, okay.
But basically, other than that.
Other than that, I hit the highlights, did I not?
Yeah, exactly.
If they want to know more about the details of what's going on and why it's going on, they can find you on Twitter where?
They can find me on Twitter at Energized Economy, ENERGZD Economy. And I will definitely be following up on this situation in Yemen.
Okay, good deal. And if you are listening to the show, we now have it on YouTube, so you can actually see Energized Economy spelled out right there on YouTube. Hoping to get the live stream going next couple of weeks. We'll see. We'll see. Working on just getting this going consistently. Today was the first time it's ran smoothly, and so I say that I'm gonna hit stop and it's not gonna record, and I'll be cussing like a sailor. But assuming everything goes well, looks like it will, get the live stream going, and then I will be, Ellen, two things I need to talk about before I go.
Yes.
Next Thursday, I will be in Tulsa, Oklahoma at the Pipeline Energy Expo. If you will be there, let me know for the award ceremony. Hopefully, bringing home the trophy, the prize, maybe a cash car. I don't know. I figured a house, something like that.
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
At the very least, you should get your own pipeline.
A pipeline in my honor.
Yeah.
I like that. And then the Friday is the Oilfield Helping Hands event. That is to help bring some kind of financial relief to the families of the victims. I say victims. I don't like that term, but maybe it's the right term. The families of the deceased. What's the right word there, Ellen? Help me out. You're the PhD here.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never been good with that. Families of people who died, and I can't say the line of duty. I don't know.
I know. It's a tough way to describe it. I'm trying to be very...
Who died bringing energy to the people.
That's exactly right. Died doing a very important job. There's no doubt about it. So what I've said is, if you're at that event, if you go to the Oilfield Helping Hands, and you're in the oil and gas business, which you probably will, Text Oil and Gas Podcast, we will be there. We'll be shooting a show. And so if you're there and you say, hey, I'm a listener to any of the podcasts, I will get you on the Text Oil and Gas Podcast. You can plug your company, your event, whatever it is you got to plug on that show. A little bit of free publicity if you'll be there. That is April the 6th in McLeod, Oklahoma. Okay, Ellen, in the meantime, people, as they turn this podcast off, there's one thing and one thing only they need to do, and what is that? They
need to order Saudi Ink on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Audible or wherever you buy your books.
In bulk. You left that one word, in bulk.
In bulk, yes. But no more than 20 orders, because then they don't count you for the bestseller list.
Okay, so let's recap that. So 19 bulk orders.
19 bulk orders.
From Amazon. Yes. And then 19 bulk orders from Barnes & Noble. And then 19 bulk orders from Books A Million. Books A Million.
How could I forget about Books A Million?
Yeah, and then that's a lot of bulk. We'll leave it there.
Yeah, but if you want to look at something that's for free, you can go on over to Forbes. I have a new piece out about how some of the things that are going on in the geopolitical world have been affecting the oil market recently. So check that out.
Okay, and you'll have investing.com coming out Wednesday, I suppose.
Yep, Wednesday. I think we might write about oil futures contracts, but I'm not sure.
Okay, all right. Anything else before we get off here today?
I think that's it.
Okay. All right. Well, Ellen, it was fun as always. Be sure to check out and thank our sponsor by going to globalenergymedia.com/DI. Check out the free trial there, and we will talk to you next week.
Bye.